Okay, if my calculations are correct, this episode that we are recording right now should come out around Christmas time. So, Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
We're talking about sex today.
Yeah.
Welcome to A Century in Cinema. I'm Arthur.
And I'm Andrew.
And this is a podcast where we discuss a classic film from every year. Today's film is from 1933, Warner Brothers' Babyface, directed by Alfred E. Green and starring Barbara Stanwyck. And you can find Babyface online to rent, as of the time of this recording, on Amazon for $1.99, YouTube for $1.99, and Google Play for $1.99. It's around. You can rent it for $1.99.
Yeah. Not a lot in the way of a physical release for this film. There's one DVD set. It's called Pre-Code Hollywood, and it was made actually by TCM, the movie channel. They released it in that set, and I'm pretty sure that set is now out of print, so it's like way too expensive. And outside of that, it's very difficult to find a physical copy of this film.
Well, thank the internet.
Yep.
That's why we stream things.
Mm-hmm.
So the year is 1933. We're getting into the really bleak years of the Great Depression. 1933, this is the year Adolf Hitler officially becomes the Chancellor of Germany. There's the Reichstag fire, and the Nazis forcefully make themselves the one party in charge of the country. Next year, Hitler will declare himself the Führer, a title that basically means he is a dictator. In the Ukraine, there's a severe famine going on, but it's a man-made famine, and some people would even call it a genocide, because it seems to be crafted by the policies of the Soviet government in order to stop an independence movement going on. In the United States, FDR puts the New Deal policies into place to try to curb the economic downturn, but it's slow going, and the Depression will continue for the rest of the decade. Honestly, when you look up events from the 30s, they start to feel really monotonous. You can just be like, yep, things are still bad. The Nazis are doing bad things. There's a Dust Bowl. Unemployment's still very high. It's like the same thing every year.
Yeah.
So let's look at some good news. What's going on at the movies? 1933 is the year King Kong is released. I love King Kong.
Same. Loved it since I was a child.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so Willis O'Brien, the animator, pioneered some of the greatest, in my opinion, cinematic visual effects, stop-motion puppets, that will be used to make fantasy and monster movies all the way until 1993, when Jurassic Park really popularizes the use of CGI. But yeah, stop-motion, it's going to define this kind of film for forever. So also, this is the year that the first drive-in movie theater is built in New Jersey.
Oh.
The idea is patented right away, and that patent will cease around the late 1940s, which is when the drive-in theater really takes off and you start seeing them all over the United States. But yeah, I always imagine like 1950s cars sitting in a drive-in, but try to imagine 1930s cars for a moment.
Right. They are so big and noisy.
Yeah.
You know, last week we discussed very briefly how we do the podcast. I kind of want to approach another question that I get a lot on this episode, which is how we are choosing these films. And I think this is a good episode to talk about this on, because this episode we did not decide until the week before we did it.
That's right. So to reiterate, we're choosing films based on a couple of criteria. I, Arthur, have to have never seen them before. We're trying to choose films that are also considered classics from that year or important for film history or world history. As the years go on, we've been having to choose between a number of really good films just because more and more movies are coming out. Originally for 1933, we had The Invisible Man, sort of that universal monster movie. But looking at our list, we had another film that was associated with H.G. Wells in just a couple years, the film The Things to Come. And we decided to keep that one on our list, but we changed the film for 1933.
Oh, I have so much to say about the things to come after that Metropolis episode, but it's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Anyways, so Arthur had mentioned that he wanted to watch The Gold Diggers of 1933, which is a musical from this year. Similarly to The Crowd, I had a film that I had never seen from 1933 that I sort of wanted to work into the mix, which is this episode, Babyface. There's a person in my life whose name is Graham. Every time he recommends me a movie, it is always a solid experience. And he had actually recommended this to me, I think, like a year or two ago. I ended up watching both of these films, Gold Diggers of 1933 and Babyface, and I had to make the final decision. And I know it sounds like I'm biased, but I really did feel this film had way more for us to discuss and was just, in general, a little more interesting. And also it ties directly into other talking points we've gone over in the past. So for this episode, that was how this film was decided upon. But for the most part, there is a list that Arthur has made of movies he has not seen from every year. And that's where we are picking them from.
Yeah, but it is definitely an evolving list.
Yes.
Yeah, going back to what you said real quick, Gold Diggers of 1933 might be the more entertaining film for you to just watch on a Friday night. But if we're going to be filling up like 45 minutes talking and discussion, sometimes we choose the film that's not just entertaining. We definitely want to choose a film that is going to be more of an interesting discussion experience, I guess.
Since the podcast has come out, my anxiety of being correct is swapped now. When we were recording these for the month or so, or month or two, before we actually started releasing episodes, my fear was people are going to be double checking me and I don't want to be checked by somebody and like it be incorrect.
Yeah.
And now that the pod has come out and people are responding and saying, oh, I'm loving all this information you're giving, and it doesn't feel like anyone's doing that. Now my anxiety is like, oh, I'm the one teaching this material, so I need to really make sure I'm telling people the truth. I don't know. It's so funny how it's kind of the same level, but it's just a different motive behind it.
Yeah. Well, I think we do a pretty good job of saying, like, this is my opinion, or I'm not sure about this, but here you are.
Yeah.
And I think as long as we keep doing that, I think we can continue as we've done. But yeah, we're not like double checking the references that we find on Wikipedia. We're not double checking how we're learning things. So, yeah.
Guess we can probably just jump into it now.
Let's jump into it.
So I'll give the plot synopsis. This is Babyface 1933. Barbara Stanwyck stars as Lily Powers, who is a woman who works for her father in a bar. It's a speakeasy, but it's essentially a bar. He goes out to the still to fix something. I don't know. What was happening was unclear, but he blows up in a very surprising and hysterical sequence. And she has one customer at the bar who she really likes, and that customer convinces her to read The Will to Power by Friedrich Nietzsche. And he essentially condenses down the moral and says, because of this book, you should use your sexuality and use your power over men to climb up in the world. And so she moves to New York, and she literally has sex with men through the building, just climbs to the top of the building. Things get complicated. There's a murder-suicide involved. She ends up having to be shipped off to Paris. The banker in charge of shipping her off to Paris also falls in love with her. He starts working at the bank in Paris. They have a legitimate relationship. Stuff goes wrong, whatever. That's not really important. He's going to go to prison if he can't pay off this amount of money, which she has. And she's worked so hard to get this money that she doesn't want to give it to him. So he attempts suicide. Before she knows he's attempted suicide, she decides that she does want to help him. She goes, she calls the ambulance. The ambulance come. He does survive the attempt. He looks at her and smiles, and all of the money she had saved up spills out of her bag, and she doesn't care about it anymore. It is a crazy plot. It is such an entertaining movie, too. But I want to know your reaction to it, because you just watched this last night, right?
Yeah, so I really like this movie. And it's got a certain level of melodrama and maybe silliness to it. But man, I liked the characters. I liked Stanwyck as Lily Powers.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a simple movie. It's, 70 minutes or so. It goes by really quickly, and it's kind of bare bones. Exactly what it wants to do, it does, but there's not a lot of flourish. There's not a lot of other stuff going on. It's a straightforward film.
Yeah. I watched it last week, and I was laughing out loud during parts of it. Gosh, that building climbing sequence, the way it's done is a camera just shows like a window that says the name of a department. You see her like flirting with a guy or going into a room with a guy. It is absolutely not subtle. The movie is very direct that they are having sex. Yeah. And then the camera pans out from that window and goes to the next window a level up. And every time, I think it does it 4 times, and every single time I cackled. I thought that was just the funniest shorthand that you could possibly come up with. It's so clever. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed this film, and I thought the ending was very dramatic. I don't know, and yeah, it is very short. I think it is 76 minutes, and it felt so brisk. Every single scene felt like, I feel like I talk about this a lot. This is something I just like in movies, though, when every single scene delivers new information and sort of propel stuff, but I feel like I say that about movies all the time.
It's just got a really good pace.
Yeah, it's really well paced.
The pacing's great. It just moves. The film moves really quickly, and you're never bored. You're just entertained as you watch it. The part that I really laughed at was when she shows a guy sitting at a desk, like some document or something like that, and she just leans right into him, and they start having like a sort of private conversation, but she's clearly seducing him, and he's clearly getting hot and bothered. And he just pauses and says to her, "Stay past 5."
Or there are these 2 women who she works with who are really disgusted by this whole thing and see right through the whole situation. And the guy who ends up committing murder-suicide, they say of him before any of that goes down, well, he's such a respectable gentleman. He's not going to be taken by her powers and stuff. And then she just like walks right into his office. And that was hilarious too. The movie is very frank in the way it discusses sexuality, and it really is able to lean into a very specific type of humor because of it.
All right. So I didn't watch this with anyone, but maybe if I had, I would have laughed more. Do you consider this to be a comedy?
Yeah.
Okay.
It has a happy ending and everything.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
I think there are some really tragic moments in there, but I think for the most part, this is supposed to be I mean, if that building sequence wasn't built for laughs, it's too bad because it's getting them now. You know what I mean? Like it reads too much like a comedy in today's era to not be seen that way.
Okay, well, it's fun.
We didn't even talk about that one scene where she's putting on her lipstick and the reflection in the mirror, and the man won't look into the room. He's already seen the other man come out, and he doesn't want to look in on her and invade her privacy. So we as the audience in the shot see her looking so, like, she looks so confident, and she knows she's just done what needs to be done, and she's reapplying her lipstick, and we see that in a reflection. She walks into the shot proper and is just distraught. It's like, oh, I've never been involved in anything like this before. I don't know what to do with myself. He took advantage of me and all this stuff. It is so funny, and it's so well composed, and yeah, there were so many great scenes in this movie. Every single joke landed really hard for me.
I wish I had watched it with a little bit more knowledge that it was a comedy.
And it is made to be taken seriously. It's not slapstick, yeah.
But just looking at the poster, like, it looks dramatic. It looks like a drama. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
But I still did really enjoy it.
Yeah, I thought it was hilarious. But I also have been known to find certain movies that aren't comedies to be comedies. So,
This is the kind of film to have fun with, for sure.
yes. Have a good time with. Cheer her on. Screw what you think about the sex politics of it or anything. Just go, Lily, go. Transition. This film, as we've said, discusses sexuality very frankly and was actually quoted as being one of the top 10 movies to start up the Hollywood Code, the Hays Code. So this is considered a pre-code classic, which we've said of a few other films in our list before. So I'm going to hand the mic to you, Arthur.
Yeah, so yeah, the other pre-code film that we sort of discussed was The Public Enemy with James Cagney.
Right.
And I talked a second in that discussion about how the Hays Code was going to go into effect in a couple of years. But as I did a little bit more digging, I found out that the Hays Code, or the Production Code, which is I think its official name, was technically already written and was being implemented as early as 1927. It's just, it was not being enforced by anyone. The management who was in charge of the office that was certifying films or reviewing films was just understaffed, and no one was really taking it seriously. So all of the code, the list of things that the studios were supposed to be sort of watching out for, was written in 27. But it's not until 1934 that the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, the MPPDA, really grows any teeth and starts to clamp down on films. That's why there's a period in Hollywood from about 1927, the beginning of talkies, to 1934 that is considered pre-code, where there's a lot more scandalous stuff that would eventually get censored once the MPPDA starts to really say, no, you cannot release this, sends the film back and says, edit this out. And it's called the Hays Code because during that time, Will H. Hayes is the guy in charge of the MPPDA. But it actually, going back to that point about how it's not until 1934 that people actually start to take this thing seriously, it's because Joseph Breen is put in charge of enforcing it, and he just clams down, and he becomes such a stickler for everyone following this thing to the T. And again, I mentioned in The Public Enemy that it's sort of like this self-censorship. It's not like this was given to Hollywood by Congress or by anyone in the government. But as Hollywood's releasing films around the country, sometimes they run into this situation where a film can't be shown in California or New York or a local city even, just because that local government or that state says no to it. And that becomes a big problem because you're trying to make revenue back and you run into all these issues. So this self-censorship basically becomes Hollywood's way of trying to avoid that situation, much to the dismay of writers and directors. But it's a financial incentive so that they avoid any bad situations that they run into with various governments and officials around the country.
And that would be around until 1966, when Jack Valenti became the president of the MPAA and completely abolishes the code, sort of infamously around the adaptation of Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which the play was such a controversial hit that MPAA and what are they called? The Catholic League of Decency or whatever. It's like the most ridiculous conservative name. But they both issued warnings that if the sexuality and language from the play was left in the film, that they would not be able to be released. It would not get a seal of approval. And then right in the middle, the code was abolished and they released the film, and it's now hailed as a classic. All 4 actors were nominated in their categories. So I always love that Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is another one of my favorite movies, was just directly tied to all of that, the like abolishing of it.
Yeah. So side note, the MPPDA eventually becomes the MPAA, which everyone knows now today for giving out the ratings like PG, PG-13, R. So the production code eventually becomes that sort of rating system that we're all so familiar with. In this era, there is no rating system. It's just this one office saying yes or no to things based on a list of subjects that they deem to be inappropriate. What other weird things are there to say about the Hays Code?
Oh, I don't know. It was bad.
Censorship's bad?
Yeah. But mostly just I have my issues with the MPAA as well. I'm going to put in a shameless plug for another film I love called This Film Is Not Yet Rated.
Yeah, good film.
If you've ever wondered how the rating system works and why some films feel so salacious and are able to get away with PG-13 and why some films have just 2 F words in them and get an R, that is a really great resource of information. It's a really good documentary. But that being said, I think the MPAA system with having a big box saying this is why it's rated this is a much better system, because truly it should be, if that's something you don't want to see in film, you can avoid it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think as far as like mandating censorship on any level to art is a fundamental misunderstanding of how art works. Not just in the fact that you want to censor it, but also in the fact that you think that you can censor it. A lot of great films come out during the code era, and a lot of them are great because it's people working within limitations and finding ways to weasel around rules being set in place. As soon as the rules were made, people were trying to break them.
Did you look at this list I sent you? Oh, the don'ts and be carefuls.
Oh, man.
Okay, so this is a longer list than I expected. I don't think we need to go through everything, but I want to point out a couple of interesting ones, and they clearly were written for the time period. Okay, so no pointed profanity of either title or lip. This includes the words God, Lord, Jesus, so you can't say any of that. I love how God is written GAWD. That's kind of funny.
The one that cracks me up is the man and woman in bed together, can't be in bed together.
Yeah.
Because the next year, 1934, when it went fully into effect and like really became a huge deal, is when It Happened One Night won the 5 big Oscars. Have you seen that?
No, but when I was reading, it mentioned that It Happens One Night came out right before the code sort of really took over. So it was sort of like this. A lot of people think of it as this sort of like last hurrah of the pre-code era.
Yeah, and okay, so that actually makes more sense as far as how it got through. But it's a very, very sexual film. I mean, the I won't spoil anything within the plot, but like the entire plot is hinging on sex, and they make this really apt visual metaphor for sex. It starts off as a gag, as a joke, and then as the film goes on, you're like, oh, that's their way of implying that. And then at the end, it just fully does it, and it's so great. And then it says the end, and it's so good. So it is funny to think that like right when the code comes into effect in 1934 and the 1935 Oscars, they give all of the major awards to like this one film that's just entirely about sex. And it is deserved. I mean, it's a great movie, but yeah, it's just funny to think that immediately people were just pushing against that.
A couple more don'ts and be carefuls. White slavery. Can't show any white slavery. I assume that means black slavery. A-okay.
Well, for sure. I mean, there are so many movies in the 40s that involve like servitude from black characters and stuff. It's horrible. White slavery? What does that even mean?
And then, right next in the list is miscegenation. I've actually never pronounced this word, but sex relationships between the white and black races.
I don't think that word should exist. It's a disgustingly written word, and it's a disgusting word. So
We have a ridicule of the clergy. You're not allowed to ridicule the clergy. It's worth noting that this list was written by a Catholic man, and there's a lot of Catholic influence throughout the code. So this is one of the instances, and I read this, where someone points out that, okay, if we can't ridicule the clergy, then we can't talk about, hypocrisy in the church. So that's not good. We can't talk about things that are actually bad in the world.
yeah.
And going along with that, further down the list, and this is in the be careful section of the list, international relations. Avoid picturizing in an unfavorable light another country's religion, history, institutions, prominent people, and citizenry. So in the 30s, there is one country that we might want to talk about in motion pictures, and that's Nazi Germany. According to the code, no one can show the concentration camps that are being built in Germany or talk about what's going on there. So it's not until, I think, like 1940 or 1941, like after the Nazis invade Poland, that Hollywood can even point at that and say, are you seeing this? And the one that comes to my mind is The Great Dictator, right, by
So good.
Charlie Chaplin.
Yes.
But I think the first one is actually technically a Three Stooges short. So yeah, it's worth checking out what is not acceptable at this time. Sympathy for criminals, obviously.
I just saw that one. Sympathy for criminals. Jeez. Excessive or lustful kissing is important, because I know a lot of people who talk about old movies and how whenever people kiss, it's just them like pressing their faces together and coming apart. And that was a huge reason of that.
I see.
Yeah. Anyways, so that's the code. Sucks, but it is a huge part of film history.
I had originally thought that it wasn't really enforced by the government until the McCarthy era with HUAC, but I don't know. I don't see anything in here about communism. I just see things like openly talk about sedition. But yeah, it's notable that there's nothing about communism in here. If this were written in the 50s, it certainly would be.
Right.
So that might be a separate issue. I don't know enough about HUAC to really talk about that yet.
So we're going to briefly talk about Barbara Stanwyck, a huge Hollywood star in this era. She had a career as a Ziegfeld girl in the 20s, but this is right before she gets her first Academy Award nomination for Stella Dallas, which is in 37. And from that point forward becomes one of the biggest actors on the map. So this is a very early film in her star rising section of her life.
She definitely like embodies that look and that feeling of the Hollywood star from that era, right?
Right. And by 1944, when she's in Double Indemnity, she is the highest paid woman in the United States. We will have plenty to discuss once we get to 1944, but did just want to go ahead and put that little tease in for the next episode. Yeah, probably should have been researching Barbara Stanwyck yesterday. I would had plenty of time, but it was just Animal Crossing. It was just Animal Crossing Day.
Nice. You know, this film is also starring John Ford.
John Wayne?
Thank you. You know, this film is also starring.
I wish John Ford just cropped up in this. That would have been hell. He's just like, she starts going through the directors at the time. That would have been too meta. Barbara Stanwyck literally sleeps through all of the major directors in Hollywood at the time. Yeah, no, I loved that John. I would call it a cameo.
Yeah, I don't think he's in here as a cameo. It's just he happens to have a role. He's not a big star yet.
Yeah, but oh my gosh, he's so beautiful in this era. Seriously, like, I don't know. I've never been able to really see the sex appeal of John Wayne, but I found him in this movie in the, like, literal 1 minute he's on screen. I was like, oh, what a nice looking man. Yeah, that was funny that he was in this.
This film also has a familiar face. The star from our 1928 film, The Crowd, James Murray. Do you see him?
No.
He plays the train.
Oh, who like comes in and like tries to kick them out before she's like, wait a minute.
Yeah, he plays the train engineer who tries to kick him out.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even recognize him. And that's so funny because, yeah, as we discussed in that episode, he did so few films afterwards. Oh, wait. Oh, man. Wait, hold up. I need to know this. Because he didn't kill himself that long after this. Oh, man. He died 3 years later.
Crazy.
Oh, man. Yeah, that was such a funny scene. That's really the first scene of her being like, okay, I have this power. I'm going to use it. Oh, man. I loved this movie, dude. I thought every single moment with the next... Well, I don't even want to call them victims, because truly she is... Oh, here comes my hot take. Yeah, she is the victim. I mean, she's working for her father, and he is selling her to these not attendees. That's not what you call them.
As early as the age of 14, she says.
Yes. It is canonical within the film. It is not implied that he has been prostituting her since she was a teenager. And you hate him so much already just because you know he's her father and he's forcing her to work for him in this bar. And she has this one friend, the guy who's reading the Nietzsche book, who also, it should be stated, refuses to sleep with her. And she actually offers to him. But then while she's talking to him, her father comes in and is like, quit wasting your time with that guy. So the movie just goes out of its way to make you hate this man and then blows him up. And I just did not see that coming. All I knew about this movie was the climbing the building sequence. I hadn't seen that, but I just knew of it. Because when Graham recommended it to me, that's what he told me about. And yeah, it's just him blowing up was so funny and unexpected to me. Yeah.
It's kind of crazy how forward this film is. Like it's there's not a lot of innuendo about. You mentioned how that's canonical in the film. It's not implied. There's a lot of really forwardness in this film about what's going on.
And not just with sex either. I mean, the murder-suicide sequence, while there wasn't a lot of blood or that wasn't, directly on screen, it's also, you do see their bodies and there's just absolutely no implication at all. It's 100% what happened. It's very interesting. I am also used to this films of this era, especially Hollywood films of this era, being more subtle because of the code and working around things. And so to see this movie just be so blatant about absolutely everything it's saying was such a refreshing thing to see in a movie.
Yeah, and apparently a lot of the Hollywood studios were trying to make films like this or were veering into subjects like this because we're in the middle of the Depression. It's just selling tickets. You have salacious material, you have violence. This is what the people want to see, apparently. So this is what's making money. And this was a film that was a response to MGM's film, Red-Headed Woman, which came out in 1932, and that was based on a novel. Sounds like a similar sort of subject. And Warner Brothers saw a hit, and they made their own version of it.
And this one's Jean Harlow. Oh, man. Okay, I gotta watch this one.
The poster for Red-Headed Woman looks really good.
Yeah, great poster. Now, within the film, I mean, obviously, I see this woman as a hero. I see this woman as like somebody truly who I almost wish I could be. But do you think this movie is vilifying her, or do you think it's defending her actions?
We had a conversation like this for our 1929 film, Pandora's Box, and that was a little bit more of a, is she the bad guy? Is she a victim? Where's that line? But in this film, I was definitely like, no, I'm on her side. Like the right. Guys she's taking advantage of are idiots or bad guys.
I think that it is in the framing of her character, the fact that she has been taken advantage of her whole life. At first, it starts off as completely practical, right? Because she has no money, she has nowhere to stay, and her friend who's reading the Friedrich Nietzsche novel gives her the way out. And he says, you're going to have to use your sexuality, but you can be empowered doing that. And And there is a discussion to be had about her receiving her sexual empowerment from a male. I do think that's a little weird, but also I do understand, I don't know, he is supposed to be seen as like a good man in power who is trying to share power with women. So the movie makes an argument for him, but I can see how that would be that's a little strange. That being said, uh yeah, I thought once she started doing the stuff, I was like, yeah, these guys, like, I mean, they're all like these horrible banker, sleazy people
I
who,
know, and this is the era where everyone hates bankers. So
yeah.
yeah, take advantage
But
of them.
when did that era end? I'm still in that era right now.
Sorry to all of our bankers listening to this show.
I don't think there's any multi-billionaire bankers listening to this podcast. And if they are, dude, share your wealth. Like, it is ridiculous down here, man.
This is a rags to riches story too. I mean, those are characters who audiences and myself like really look up to and admire. So when there's a couple scenes in this where you can see her mask break, like she uses the word ain't and she corrects herself because she's living in a high
I
society.
loved that. That's such a good detail.
That person who is living a lie in this society, as they try to climb up the social ladder and be something more than they were born into. And that's like such an American archetype that I can't help but admire Lily Powers in this film, especially when she comes into the boardroom and someone has to pull up a chair for her, and it's this big like throne looking chair compared to the bankers who all have their little chairs. She looks so powerful in that moment as she just commands the room. Like, you love her.
Mm-hmm. You really are rooting for her. And even in the ending, for me, the moral question wasn't whether she should save his life or not. It was, what does she want to do? Because the whole movie was, first of all, finding out what she wants and then learning how to get it. I didn't really even care about the guy at all, but I really cared whether she cared about him or not. Yeah, I just loved that decision.
Yeah. Do you think that ending was sort of, I don't know what I'm saying here.
I do get what you mean. It feels crazy fast. I mean, pretty much from the moment she goes to Paris, the movie has a much faster pace, and it was already very quickly paced up to that point. It really does feel like one big excuse to build up this morality debate for her, and then for us as the audience to see what she will do.
Like you said, it's a happy ending, and it shouldn't surprise me that we're in Hollywood during this time period. There's a happy ending. It's not going to end like Pandora's box. But it does feel like this could have been a more tragic story and had an ending where she gets her comeuppance, almost like the gangster films from this time period, right? Where they all have some sort of punishment in the end. But no, this is a comedy.
I did think Teresa Harris gave a very interesting performance in this film. She is the help for her father, and then when Lily has to make her escape, she brings her with her so that nothing bad will happen to her. And throughout the film, they are represented as confidants to each other. There's still something very problematic about her depiction. I mean, she is still the help. But to see a black actress in this era get such a big role, and she does play a part in Lily's journey, I thought that was very interesting.
You know, I don't expect much from a Hollywood big production to have deep or interesting African-American characters at this time period. Mm-hmm. But she's still treated with more respect than I expect from a lot of these films. I mean, we've watched so many problematic, racist Hollywood films from some recent films in our list that this felt okay.
Yeah, that was what I felt was, the fact that they have a kinship and that she is considered a friend to the main character.
For most of the film, they're just friends. And then once Lily Powers has a certain status and wealth, yeah, she brings her friend in to be her maid. She is still the help. But then sometime in the film, one of the men says to Lily Powers, like, you have to get rid of her. And Lily says, no, absolutely not.
Yeah. I thought they were going to do a thing where, like, oh, she becomes rich and wealthy, so now she's going to treat her friend like garbage. But they never really went for that. And yeah, it does feel like she brings her in as the help more so she has a legitimate job, and they can both be making money off of this situation. And it was also, ignoring the race for a moment, it was also just really interesting that there was an entire aspect of this plot where while she's climbing up, she is trying to support a fellow woman who is a friend of hers. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, a weirdly progressive film from a big Hollywood studio at the time.
Yeah, and progressive for 1934, just to make sure that's cemented.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I don't want anyone
and also,
watching
like,
this and being like, oh, this is not progressive, because you're right. But, like...
and also, along with that, like, go watch an Oscar Michaud movie. Like, that's way more progressive, but that's a smaller independent film, you know?
Would you still consider this film controversial today?
I don't think so.
No.
Would you?
I think I could see people watching this and being weirded out or upset by it. I guess I'm more just imagining, like, a conservative grandma who loves all of John Wayne's movies and finds out he's in this. Whether if she was watching this or not, she would consider it controversial.
I think a conservative grandma might find this controversial, yeah. I think it might be controversial in a different way. This idea that in order for a woman to attain power, she has to sleep her way to the top.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't believe that's true in any way. But I definitely believe that was true, for reasons that are not on women's shoulders, that was a huge part of being a woman and in American government systems in this time period, which is really unfortunate, but we are on a upswing in that department as far as representation and rights goes. So
yeah, I know what you mean about that conservative grandma being upset by this film. But then, like you said, she goes and watches the John Wayne film where he shoots a bunch of people, and that's fine.
Yeah, it is strange how violence seems to be a little more tolerable in movies than sexuality. I mean, besides, like, stuff involving criminals, how much of the code was even about violence? But when you compare it to how much of it is about sexuality, implied sexuality, nudity, kissing, I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right there. There's just a few points that they make sure you are careful with theft, robbery, brutality, and possible gruesomeness, arson, and the use of firearms. But you're right, most of the code is about sexuality and other topics.
It's just so weird because, like, as human beings, as far as how we experience life, I don't know. People are just more likely to experience sexuality in life than on a first-hand basis than they are to experience, like, hardcore, disastrous violence, like, from their own hands or right in front of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just weird how something that is probably a little more common and a little more shared in the human experience is considered so much more vulgar and so much worse. I don't know.
Like we've already pointed out in a couple of episodes so far, it seems to be like an American thing. Like the European films we've been watching, no problem with sexuality. And, you know, that's true today. Everyone talks about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like it's this weird American preoccupation, this like fear of sex and what it's going to do to corrupt the minds of children. The Hays Code in 1927 was originally written with that think of the children in mind, because once films became talkies that very same year, there was a lot of fear about, okay, now kids can go see it. They don't have to just read the intertitles. What is this going to do to them? It's about the children and keeping them away from the idea of sex for as long as possible.
Yeah. And I do understand that protective instinct. I mean, I share that as well, you know. But I also, I don't know, people are going to find out about sex and sexuality no matter what. So it just feels like, wouldn't you rather make sure they were safe and like know about the dangers involved rather than trying and sheltering them completely from it?
Well, I think that's the idea behind the code, right? That these are the standards that a certain group of people who wrote the code want to protect their children from, so that mom and dad can teach them the correct way to experience this thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's gross.
Yeah.
We should watch more violent films.
Yeah, exactly. If you as a parent are like that concerned, then it's up to you to know what you do or don't want to show your kids. I don't think should be something that's censored en masse because any kid can walk into a theater or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, and it's weird, the double standard there, because violence is so much more acceptable, even in a lot of kids' stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Bugs Bunny, hello.
I know. I love it, but hello. Let's talk about this review really quickly. It's from the New York Times in 1933. It's not a very good review.
It's a horrible review.
And I mean that in that it's like written poorly.
Yes. I cannot stand it when a review is nothing more than a just rewording of the plot. Actually, one of the rules I was always taught when writing criticism was you should never have to repeat the plot. We do plot descriptions in this podcast as a way of catching up listeners who don't see the film up to what we are going to be talking about in the actual podcast. But I think if you're just giving a self-written, opinionated piece on something, and the entire piece is relying on you just telling people what the movie is and is about, as opposed to saying, these are my opinions, these are themes brought up, I don't know. Ah!
It's so lazy.
Yeah, it drives me up the wall.
And I get it. Like, if you're seeing a ton of films each week as a film critic, the film that you don't like, that you still got to fill out the newspaper and give a certain word count to the editor. All right, I'm just going to repeat the plot, but I didn't like it. And clearly, yeah, I don't think this person liked it. But I don't know, at least go into why you didn't like it. They just kind of wave it off.
It's hard to tell if he didn't like it. You definitely know that they are not a big fan of her, and it's only because the very final sentence, he says, once aboard the steamship, however, she suffers a change of heart and is supposed to do her one good deed of the story. And that's a very unfair representation of her character and interpretation of her character. It's not a matter of good or bad. The whole movie is her doing what she needs to do to survive, and then turns into her gaining power, which a lot of people, myself included, see as a net good. Like, in this world of nothing but men in power, she finds a way to become a woman in power and to have a man's life in her hands and to have power over his outcome, over whether he goes to jail or not. And the whole movie, her life is seemingly in the hands of other untrustworthy people. So I don't know. It's just not a matter of good or bad. It's so weird to think of that as like her good deed, because yeah, again, I don't even know if the film is saying that what she did was a good thing. It was just what she wanted to do. She stuck to her heart and stuck to her guts.
I was gonna say, like, she drives a couple people to murder suicide. Is that her? Is that on her?
Is that on her? I don't know. They definitely wouldn't have done that if she hadn't have been involved. But there were also a lot of very clear issues between those two men that she had no responsibility of whatsoever. And
I mean, the men are cheating on their wives to sleep with her. They're not good guys. They're not the good guys in this story, that's for sure.
Yeah, and again, he is the one that comes in with a gun and overreacts and then kills himself, which that's his decision. That's what he does. So I'm not going to pin that on her or say that she's responsible for that.
I'm just trying to get into the head of this reviewer.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess I'm like responding to you as if you are the reviewer.
I was going to say that it's so funny that so many of the films that we've been watching have had pretty bad reviews from the time period. Obviously, Babyface has gained some critical appreciation in the years. Time magazine named it one of the 100 best films of the last 80 years.
I really do think it was that TCM screening / DVD release that sparked up more interest in the film.
And it being one of the last pre-code films and one of the ones that really pushes the Hays Code into effect. And I don't know too much about what that means. Like, why, like, this film was one of the, what was it? One of the 10 films that caused the production code to be enforced.
And as far as I know, that quote is just sort of like a hearsay, like a comment. But yeah, someone, I can't remember who said it, but someone said this is in the top 10 films that caused the code. Yeah, I wish there was like just a glowing review for Babyface. Just one person who really gets it from that time period. I'm sure people liked it. It was successful, to my knowledge.
I was just going to say, it's interesting that so many of the films we watch have bad reviews. So many people didn't seem to like them in the era, but clearly there's something about them that stuck.
It also ties into that whole stereotype. You know, the stereotype has existed for forever as the critic as just being this person who has their nose up and refuses to enjoy anything. And that stereotype has real roots. And I think we're witnessing those. You know, in the early era of criticism, I think there was probably a little bit more pressure to be negative. Because for some reason people see viewing a film negatively as having a more intelligent opinion. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
When you are really able to tear something apart, and there are plenty of films that I have torn apart. It's not something I thoroughly enjoy doing, but if I see something that I genuinely dislike, I will tell you why I dislike it. And even films that I've seen that I hate, I think I might have already mentioned this in this podcast, but even films I've seen that I hate, I always think, you know what, that helped build my taste because I know that's something I don't like.
Yeah, in an early episode, we talk about how we don't like to give things ratings and stuff like that.
So I definitely think that that's kind of where the stereotype is coming from, and we're just seeing all these critics just have nothing to say at all, just repeating the plot or like for just a few sentences telling you what it's about, which, you know, it's a newspaper review, so I understand people are just flipping through and they kind of want to know what the movie's about, and then ending it with one snide remark. And I truly think that snide remark is them saying, look, I'm a real critic. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
As a legit critic, I didn't like any movies that came out this year.
And that's not to say that when critics don't love a movie, that it's somehow amazing. There are plenty of bad films out there.
Oh, yeah. But I do genuinely believe if you are interested in a movie, you should not go to a review to decide whether you're going to see it or not. If you're interested in a movie, just watch it.
Go see it. And I will say, I have found a lot of films, you know, that I wouldn't have found because of critics I trust. So there are legitimate reasons to look to critics for certain recommendations and things like that. There's a place for them in the film industry for sure. All right. We've been recording for a little while now. I think it's a good time to move on to our next film. So next week, we'll be watching La La Land from French director Jean Vigo.
He had a very, very small career in movie making. So we will not only be watching that, we will be watching the 3 shorts he directed before it as well.
And all of Jean Vigo's films are available on the Criterion channel. You can check the show notes for more details about where else they might be at this time. We'll spend most of our time talking about La La Land, but I understand his shorts are worth watching as well. So I will.
We will see you all next week. A huge thank you to Nathan Royal for our show's music. If you're enjoying A Century in Cinema, we'd love you... I'm just going to start over. If you're enjoying A Century in Cinema, we would love if you took a second to help support the show. You can do that by subscribing, giving us those ratings so that we can get those internet algorithms, and to recommend us to someone else who likes movies and someone else who's looking for a new podcast. Thanks a lot, and we will have a new episode next week.
I just want to give a shout out to all our Patreon members who keep the show running. Thank you all. You too can become a patron and get access to bonus episodes linked down in the show notes. You're listening on YouTube now, so like and subscribe and comment down below. Tell us if you've seen the film. What did you think of it? Did we miss anything? Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you for the next one.